missions to make sure that Bangor taught that, researched that. And one of the ways you can do that is by having a plant collection that has scientific merit, that displays the plant kingdom in all its glory, from the tropics to the poles. And so he conceived that to happen here at Treborth. And imagine starting that from scratch, trying to persuade people about that. He got a few heavyweights on his side. He got the then director of Kew, Sir George Taylor, to support the idea and to convince the university authorities, which he did most effectively. And work began here in the early 60s and developed mainly in terms of landscaping this 5 or 6 acres that we're sitting in now, and setting up first 2 greenhouses, then 3, and eventually 5, with 2 more to come later on in the 80s, so that there was a master collection of about 2,500 species for teaching and research. And this had an enormous value to the courses that Bangor could offer. Not only was Bangor situated in a wonderfully diverse natural area, North Wales, but it had at its disposal this great plant collection, which was used increasingly by then world authorities on plant ecology, such as Professor Greg Smith, and of course Ralph, and it's great to see you here, Ralph. Well done. And others whose interests were ecophysiological. It's great to see Chris Marshall here today, who taught me many things about plant metabolism. And also to look at plant design, how plants occupy space, what they do when they need to flower and reproduce. And Adrian Bell's career flourished by using plant collections like this. Great to see you here. So we were developing this fantastic collection and the associated research and teaching. And I came along at a golden era, because mid-70s, all these things have reached maturity. And we were being able to utilize a maturing plant collection, and we had the staff who understood it and could use it properly. And in addition, we had people, charismatic John Harper and his research teams, that looked, yes, at some of the adaptive value of the plants in the greenhouse, but also simply at the meadow. This wonderful meadow that we've got, which I haven't mentioned yet, and yet is such a fundamental part of Treborth. This meadow is full of 150 wild plant species, and there is no reason to add any more to that. It is fascinating. It is actually one of the most diverse bits of Treborth without even trying. And John Harper recognised that, and he set his students to studying it in every conceivable detail. He made them lie on their front for hours on end, looking at the individual growth of plant shoots and roots to see how they interacted, and how the animals came along and disposed of them or modified their growth. So that within the theatre of the garden, the outside theatre, we got to know plants intimately and began to understand the essence of plant ecology. But of course Harper was a great overall ecologist, and he never neglected the animals. And he could see the worth of Treborth not just as a botanic garden, but as a research station, as an outdoor laboratory, a nature reserve. And he encouraged that interest. He was the first to bring in the zoologists to help us understand more about what the animals were doing to the plants and vice versa. So this was becoming increasingly valuable as a general biological resource, and coincided with the move away from a pure botany department to a biological science department, which incorporated all elements of biology. Now, in order to understand biology, that's what you've got to do. There's no point in being just a pure botanist, fun as it is. It's pointless because you don't understand the other half of the story. So I reckon that was the best time at Bangor, because every element that is important to biologists was there. The natural environment, the plant collection inside and out, and this wonderful arena in which we have control. We can set up long-term experiments, which Harper did, and not only the meadow but the woodland, which I haven't mentioned yet, and the seashore. Everything perfect. But when it peaked, it had to fall again, and of course universities changed a lot in the 80s and 90s, and serious cuts were made, and we lost out. And I guess this happened in many places. And it's such a pity, because the momentum went somewhere, and particularly in Boston. And what a pity, because after all, they're the primary producers on this planet. We shouldn't neglect them. We do so very much at our peril. But for some inconceivable reason, that's exactly what has happened, both home and abroad. So that actually since the mid-80s, it's been more of a struggle to maintain the flourishing science that had been created in the late 60s and 70s. Thank you. Give you a moment to take it. So we get into the 80s and 90s, and there's more about this in the article. And this is where it became increasingly important to justify Treborth at a wider level. As we lost staff and could offer fewer courses in botany, one sensed a questioning of the worth of the botanic garden. And it was increasingly seen as a luxury that the university couldn't necessarily afford. This wasn't peculiar to Bangor. It was happening all over. And if you plot the success or failure of botanic gardens, you can see that during the 80s there was a downturn, and many universities decided to give them up altogether or offloaded them to local councils, etc. And in fact, nowadays there are very few university botanic gardens left in the UK. This is the only one that works still as a fundamental part of a biology department here in Wales. It's the only one left. And you could number them on the fingers of certainly two hands elsewhere in Britain. So in that sense, the present situation is of some considerable concern. And Treborth suffered badly, and to the point where after the year 2000 things began to get really serious in terms of funding. Not just in the sense that fewer staff to make use of the collections, but also fewer staff to look after them. And so there was a decline in the number of gardens, and this hit us badly, because to have a garden that's of any worth, it has to have specialist input from horticultural staff, and that declined. So that I eventually lost my only gardener, Mike, and it's great to see you here today, Mike, in 2007, I think, wasn't it? And that really, was a very low point, because we've got 40 acres, but no garden. Just one curator, and very much an rather absent-minded curator. So a very difficult situation. And you're going to hear more about how that was alleviated.